Chapter 1, Part 2, A Letter Begun. The apartment began dimming with the descending sun. The pulsing faint glow of the brass wall sconce lit the bedroom in the apartment, casting shadows that danced across the wooden floor. Marcello stood over his bed, beside an old wooden dresser, its surface worn smooth from years of use. With care and habitual rhythm, he laid out his garments for the next morning: charcoal dress pants, a white button-up shirt, a gray vest, and, resting gently atop of the stack, a deep blue bow tie. His auburn hair slicked back to perfection caught the faintest gleam from the lamp. His mustache and fiery beard were neatly groomed, symmetrical in their precision. The thin round glasses perched on his nose reflected his methodical focus, though his brow was furrowed. As he smoothed out a sleeve, he caught a motion from the corner of his eye. Sammie, the blue jay, hopping across the windowsill. With a gentleman's grace, Sammie used his beak to lean the envelope against his basket. Marcello paused, the shirt still half folded in his hands. He fixated on the envelope, the threads of his mind unspooling. The letter from 3 days ago, the handwriting, the seal, the same creeping familiarity that coiled through his chest whenever he glanced at it. Marcello turned his eyes towards the narrow closet across from the room. The door stood ajar, revealing not coats nor shoes, but countless stacks of old newspapers, yellowed and fragile. Some dated back decades, others more recent. They were crammed between older stacks, all without an obvious system. A soft trill broke the silence. Sammie had fluttered onto the footboard, watching him, head tilted in quiet concern. Marcello's brows twitched, then he shook his head sharply, scattering the storm of thoughts raining in his mind. "I can't keep going in circles," he muttered, rubbing his temples, sitting down slowly. Sammie launched into the air, the light of the sconce brushing warm on his sapphire feathers. He settled into Marcello's lap. Giving a low gawk, he tapped his beak against Marcello's belt. "Not now, Sammie," Marcello said, voice low but not unkind. Undeterred, Sammie hopped onto the bed, examining the outfit. He pecked at the blue bow tie, then with a rustle of wings, snatched it up and flew across the room. With deft precision, he perched onto the rack by the closet, hanging the bow tie in its usual spot. But with a quickness, he plucked a burgundy bow tie from the rack and glided back to the bed, dropping it neatly atop of the laid-out clothes. Marcello stared. His lips cracked open, almost a smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He exhaled slowly, gazing back at the open closet. "There's something in there," he murmured. "I don't know what I'm looking for, but something keeps telling me to dig deeper." Sammie tilted his head again, then settled down on the blanket, his feathers fluffing out in a familiar signal of trust and patience. Marcello rose from the bed, his steps swift now and purposeful. He crouched in front of the closet and pulled a stack of old broadsheets into his arms. "I'll take these to the desk," he said, mostly to himself. Without another word, he strode into the living room and set the papers down on the desk with a dull thud. His hands went straight for the crate Walls came by with earlier, but the moment he lifted it, the old wood gave way with a glint. The spill came in a rush. Books thudded and sprawled open, their yellowed pages shivering in the faint draft. Dried fruit rolled into shadow, followed by the clink of small glass bottles letting loose the sharp scents of cinnamon and cardamom. Coffee beans pattered all over the floorboards, scattering like ants. His jaw tightened. One splintered plank remained in his left hand. He hurled it against the plaster wall. The crack rang sharp, chipping the surface, white dust and fragments tumbling down. He planted his hands on his hips, chest rising and falling, eyes tipped up toward the ceiling as if seeking composure there, thoughts racing on again. His heart flutters with a tingle, and within seconds, he lowered his gaze, a breath escaping with a ghost of a chuckle. He turned his head, meeting Sammie's dark eyes with a sideways smirk. Sammie had been there all along, silent, as Marcello's temper flared, but his quiet presence anchored him without a word. Marcello didn't hear him. He didn't need to. The familiar, soulful tingle spread through Marcello, the kind that only came when Sammie was near. He sank to his knees with a slow, simmering resentment, gathering the scattered contents piece by piece. As he continued, he noticed a small stack of old newspapers with names he had never heard of before. The Vendette, Carver Weekly, and The Bar. Amongst the dislodged newspapers was one that stopped him cold. It was pristine, too pristine, a relic untouched by time, a paper dated back to 1874, the Liberator Gazette. His fingers trembled as he picked it up. The front page showed a sepia photograph, 3 men in Northsman attire, rifles in hand, standing against a large cave entrance. One wore a gentleman's suit fabricated into his uniform, with spectacles and wavy hair. Another had a thick mustache and a sharp nose, with an expression hard-edged and fierce. The last man, dressed as a Northsman sergeant, bore a smirk with scruffy chin hair and a set of scars on his left cheek, with a tomahawk hanging on his shoulder. They looked impossibly real. Marcello stared, transfixed as a cold sense of déjà vu wrapped around his spine. He lowered himself into his old swivel chair, the springs creaking beneath him. His eyes scanned the bold headline, "The Northmen Capture Lichmore and Advance." He read on. The article spoke of strategic brilliance, of impossible odds, of 3 commanding figures who led the charge to reclaim Lichmore from South Band Hold. Their names were oddly familiar: Lieutenant Lucas Hawthorne, Lieutenant Nathaniel Dugan, and Sergeant Von Marsh. Their exploits stirred something in the depths of his memory, an uncomfortable tune remembered in fragments. Time dissolved. One newspaper led to another. He desperately wrote notes scribbled in the margins, strange codes, half-legible names that tugged at something long buried, tacked into the cracked plaster wall. Hours passed in silence. With the faintest creak of hinges, the window swung open and slowly shut. Marcello, rubbing his burning eyes, dashed into the bedroom. The sun had risen, pale gold once more illuminating the room. When he turned toward the window, the basket was empty, the sealed envelope gone. The clothes he'd laid out on the bed remained untouched, waiting for him as if welcoming the day in his stead. He took his time. The charcoal dress pants came first, the fabric whispering as he drew them up, smoothing the creases with a careful hand. The white button-up followed, crisp and cool, suspenders stretched over his shoulders. He slipped on the gray vest, the snug fit drawing his posture upright. Finally, the burgundy bow tie, a gentleman's signature, was tied with the care of a man who still believed that presentation was an unspoken language. By the time he was done, he stood not just dressed, but composed, armored in civility, ready to meet whatever the day intended to bring. His gaze shifted to the wooden nightstand beside the bed. There sat a half-empty glass of water, unmoved. Next to it, cradled in a shallow depression of worn wood, lay a brass pocket watch, brilliant in the soft light. Its engraved casing shimmered slightly as he picked it up, the indigenous patterns catching the light in intricate loops and sunbursts. The chain pulled into his hand like water. He studied it again and again, as if answers might bloom from the metal surface. It was the only thing he had carried with him before waking in Jarlsford all of those years ago. Not a name and not a memory, just the watch, ticking like it had always belonged to him. He clicked it closed and placed it in his vest pocket. As the final ensemble, he grabbed his black peacoat from the brass hook beside the door and stepped into the hallway. The door clicked behind him, just as a blur of motion passed by.
Morning, Marcello.
Clara's voice called back to him as she dashed downstairs, files spilling from the corner of her satchel. He opened his mouth to respond, but she was already gone. The stairwell swallowed her voice, her footsteps faded into the distance, but the rest of the building was wide awake. As he walked, the air was alive with muffled life behind each door. An old gramophone playing a slow waltz, the clink of teacups in the next apartment, a child's sudden laugh spilling into a hushed scolding, the shuffle of slippers across worn rugs. The building was old, but beautifully kept. Each polished banister and well-oiled hinge a quiet testament to Miss Rosie's hand. She was the sort of landlord who patched wallpaper herself, kept the brass door plates gleaming, and made sure every hallway carried the faint, comforting scent of lavender polish. The building had a charm no architect could design. It was hers, and it breathed because she tended to it. Outside, the crispness hit him instantly, nipping at his cheeks and tugging at his coat. The sidewalk glistened slightly with dew, and the red brick of the building was stained deeper in hue by the cold. Miss Rosie was already outside, a broom in hand, gently sweeping a pile of golden orange leaves that had gathered around the bottom stoop. Her short frame stood proud in a tan work dress with rolled sleeves, her hair tucked beneath a patterned wrap. She was bent at the waist, but moved with grace, her long arms making smooth sweeps. When she noticed him, she stopped mid-motion, leaning on the broom and beaming at him.